So today was Johannesburg, where we went into Soweto and the Apartheid Museum. Definitely things that interest me. I love safaris and coasts and shopping and all that stuff. But history is really important to me, and that is what really drew me to South Africa was history. So I know a lot about apartheid. I've read a lot about it. I've read a lot about Nelson Mandela. So it was just very interesting to see that and to understand kind of the history of the city and, well, of the country, really, but the city and Nelson Mandela, all that good stuff. And but just also to see, like, still just how many problems are here and just how how not well taken care of people are. And it's like, yeah, you get rid of apartheid, but like it's still like people are still paying for it a lot later, and especially when when we keep getting warned about how dangerous it is to be here and like not to go out by yourself, not to leave the premises of the hotel. Like I didn't even take my phone with me today. I didn't take a purse. And I figured there aren't any things there that like I'm going to take pictures of. It's really more about understanding the history and taking in the sites. So we did go to Nelson Mandela's house, which was interesting. The Apartheid Museum was definitely interesting. It's also tough to see. The one thing that I wasn't expecting that we did have was like a speaker who came out to us. We were in Soweto at like a memorial where a student protest took place in 1976, and a 12-year-old boy was killed, and it was a famous photograph of somebody that had picked him up and had gone running to try to take him to safety. And his sister, the 12-year-old sister, was in that, and she was 16. And that surviving sister is still alive and came out and told us the story of that day. In terms of like, how the student protests started, why, because they were about to be forced to learn everything in Afrikaans, and they were protesting that. And really, this student protest of 1976 was kind of the beginning of the national attention that was, or international attention that was needed to put some pressure on apartheid. It was kind of the first like falling of the curtain that like other countries saw and started asking questions, and sanctions began, and kind of all the unraveling of apartheid and fighting over the next couple decades really began in that moment. At least, as far as like the public is concerned. People have been fighting it long before that. That's how Nelson Mandela was in prison. But this was kind of like the linchpin of that. So she's a very powerful speaker. And to hear her tell the story was incredibly moving, especially emotional for me, in that. And of course, my situation was not nearly as dire, and my outcome was significantly better than hers. But the connection between her and her brother, and the sense of trying to protect him and look after him and know that, he wasn't in a safe place. Like, she was older and knew a little bit more about what they were doing and why, but he was there, and just becoming separated from him and then trying to get him into safety and doing that, but then getting separated from him again, which is then when he was shot and killed. And I absolutely relate to that sibling bond of wanting to protect your youngers, and that terror of being separated during a traumatic event, because I was at the Boston Marathon bombing, and that is where I got my PTSD. But in that event, I was supposed to be there. I was supposed to be meeting my sister. My sister-in-law was running, and I was supposed to be meeting my sister about 5 blocks down. But things changed throughout the day, and I was running late, and there wasn't, I wasn't going to make it to her on time to see my sister-in-law run by. So I was at the finish line, and I decided to stay there, and I would greet my sister-in-law there and then go back and connect with my sister. And obviously, we all know what happened that day. Two bombs went off, one on either side of me. I was in between both of those streets, and I was standing in the restaurant bar window, the only one that was not shattered from the blast. And so I walked away unharmed physically. But the biggest trauma of that event was being separated from my sister and not knowing where she was, and knowing, okay, I'm okay, but I don't know where she is, and I don't know if she's okay, and I have this older sister responsibility to protect her. Also, she was pregnant at the time, and so that kind of made it even more, I don't know, that made it even more intense. And my parents weren't there. They were supposed to be there, and I was calling them to tell them what happened because I knew they'd be seeing it on the news. And the phone lines went down, right after I basically said, I can't find my sister. And the phone line went out while talking to my parents, and then that meant we couldn't text, and so I couldn't find my sister. And fortunately, she had some friends nearby that had signs for the marathon up, and so what they did is they flipped the signs over and put my name on it, and kind of came towards the direction that I was, and I went towards the direction I was hoping my sister was, and I eventually saw that sign, and that's how I reconnected with my sister. But that has been the greatest trauma of my life, was that fear of that disconnect from my sister, that separation and that fear. And I got my sister back, and we're okay, and we survived. And this wasn't a political protest. This was just some random act of violence that happened. But this was listening to this woman speak about her experience and her brother. The threads of familiarity, and empathy for her experience just hit me so hard. I cried at the end of her talking because it was I felt it so deep. I will never not feel that bond or connection with my siblings, especially my sister. My sister and I are very, very close, and that day, that is the most upsetting memory I have. And I have other memories from that day, and I have PTSD from a lot of things and survivor's guilt, and I've always been significantly screwed up from that event. I'm certainly in better shape now than I was the first couple years after, but I'll tell you, I'll never forget that feeling of that separation and terror for my sister. And I'm sure she had similar feelings, especially because she knew I was much closer to whatever was happening than she was. So it's just really powerful to see this kind of history. But usually when we're seeing history in museums or through guides or stopping in places or looking at memorials, there's nobody there from that time in history because it's so far back, everybody's deceased. There's no living history, there's no living memory. And so this is the first time in all of kind of these experiences that I've talked or I've heard from somebody who was there when it happened, and who had significant impact in losing a family member. And so that really brought this story to life, and it really, it was just very impactful and very moving. And it's also really disturbing too when you look at apartheid, and then I consider some of the other trips that I've been on. I've been to Rwanda, I've seen history on the genocide, I've been to Germany, I understand quite a bit about Hitler's Germany. I've been to Vietnam and Cambodia. So I am very well immersed in these societies that pit, the poor against it's the government that's screwing us all over, but they take the poor and the uneducated and they pit them against the wrong people so that the societies fight each other, instead of actually having that common united thread of realizing that it's our government and our billionaires and our politicians that are doing it to all of us. So it's really frustrating to see that happening over and over and over again. And it's happening in our own country. In this, it's like by a playbook, and yet people still fall prey to it. So I don't know, heavy day, but like this is the stuff you should be learning.